Hi, I'm Darren Carter, and you're listening to the Baggies Podcast.
Hello and welcome back to the Baggies Podcast, where, of course, we're giving you all the latest news, views and opinions on all things Albion. Back again with a very, very special episode. I'm delighted to be joined by former West Bromwich Albion player Darren Carter today. Darren, how are you doing, mate? Welcome to the show.
No, thanks for having me. I'm very well, thank you, mate.
Yeah, great to hear. And we're going to be chatting through today's episode with Darren about his time at West Bromwich Albion. But before we get into it, make sure you subscribe to the Baggies Podcast. Be sure to drop us a little review if you've enjoyed the episode as well. But yeah, Darren, let's start with sort of the beginning of your life or your career, as a sense. See, growing up, you were born in Solihull, which is not too far away from West Bromwich itself. So, Darren, growing up, was it something that you always wanted to do with being a footballer? Is that something that you always had a bit of a dream to do?
Yeah, I think from whenever I could walk and kick a football, or not so much a football, it was whatever I could get hold of that was round and replicated a football. I love the game, and my dad was a sort of a semi-pro footballer, and that's he loved it. He was a big Birmingham City fan, so going and watching him on a Saturday or a Sunday, and then going down and watching Blues play. That was my upbringing, really. So, went into my first Sunday league team in the Central Warwickshire League, a team called Arden Forest. I think I was 7 or 8 when I first had my first team, and it went from there. But yeah, literally from when I could kick a football, that was all I wanted to do.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. Just kicking like stones and stuff around the concrete, around the pavements and stuff like that. But Darren, obviously you started your career at Birmingham City really as a professional club. But before, I think during that, or perhaps before that time, you played in the 2003 World Youth Cup, I think it was. And I think I've probably just been born around that sort of time. But you were sent off, I read, for a foul on Cristiano Ronaldo. Do you remember much about that? Is that something that you can recall for us?
Well, it was so I'd actually made my Birmingham debut the season before, so in early 2002, and obviously my debut was at the Hawthorns against West Brom.
Yeah.
And then later on, my West Brom debut was against Blues.
Yeah,
so it's quite funny how that works out. But yeah, obviously we'll come on to that. But yeah, so the 2003 World Cup, as it was under 20s World Cup, I got picked to represent England in that, and so it wasn't the sending off. I think that might have been in the tournament before, in the Toulon tournament a year before. And yeah, I think Wikipedia's picked it up as if it was Cristiano Ronaldo I tackled, but if my memory serves right, he played in the game, and there was a lot of hype around him at that time. He was still at Sporting, and I think the Manchester United rumours were circling him, so he was obviously a player to watch, and he was captain of that Portugal team that we played, but it wasn't actually him I tackled, but it seemed to work its way into the headlines, and it's one of them. You think, well, do I really want to change it? No, we might as well leave it. So yeah, I don't think it actually was Cristiano, but he played in the game and he was fantastic. And it was after that tournament that summer that he went to Manchester United.
Right, I see. There we go. I suppose that's still one to tell the grandkids about if you just show them the news headlines and say, "Look at me, I was tackling Cristiano Ronaldo in that tournament." But yeah,
you're trying to.
Yeah, you definitely. But you joined West Brom in the summer of 2005. Obviously from Birmingham City after a bit of a loan spell at Sunderland as well. How did that move come about, and how did you sort of get to know about that move?
Well, at the time, I'd come off a season where I'd been on loan at Sunderland for half the year and in the Championship, and Sunderland were flying high, top of the Championship, got promoted that year. But I come back to Blues and played the second half of the season in the Premier League, and sort of got into the summer and had no real visions of me leaving the club. It was only when I was actually on holiday, I got a call from Steve Bruce to say that Brian Robson wants to speak to me, and Brian Robson was a big player that I looked up to when I was younger. My dad always used to say to me, as soon as he sort of seen that I was going to become a midfield player, or that's where I was predominantly playing, to watch Brian Robson. He was all action. He did everything a midfielder should do. Defensively, goes forward, got goals, and box-to-box midfielder, which was something then that I modelled my game on. So when someone like that, a hero of yours, wants to speak to you, you go and see him. So I was quite fortunate as well that my agent at the time was Cyril Regis.
Wow, fantastic.
So literally I went to a beer garden in Coventry, would you believe, with Cyril Regis, Brian Robson. We sat in a beer garden on a nice summer day, and and Brian basically said he wanted me at the Baggies. I hadn't really thought about moving away from Birmingham at that time, leaving Blues only obviously to go on loan. And it coincided that Mick McCarthy at Sunderland wanted me to go back there as well that year, another year's loan. They got promoted to the Premier League. So it was quite a weird situation, really. I was at Blues, and Steve Bruce was saying to me it was my decision that I don't have to leave. I've got Brian Robson saying he wanted me at West Brom, and then Mick McCarthy at Sunderland. So I was, had a great decision to make, really. Very fortunate, really, if you look back. But there was just something, obviously, about meeting Brian and wanting to, I think, just leave Blues, where I always felt like I was going to be the young lad, and sort of time to go away and grow up, really. Like I say, sitting and speaking to Brian Robson certainly influenced my decision.
The mention of Steve Bruce there has just sparked me into, obviously he's been in the headlines a little bit recently with the Newcastle takeover and whatnot. I didn't have this written down because obviously I didn't quite think to think about Steve Bruce. But how did you find him as a manager at Birmingham? Because that's quite an interesting thing. You're the first player I've had that's played under Steve Bruce. So how did you find him?
Well, firstly, he gave me my professional debut, so I'll always be indebted to him for that. And like you say, or I said earlier, it was obviously at West Brom in a local derby at the Hawthorns, so a big game as well to actually throw me in and actually start the game. So he hadn't long been at the club when he gave me my debut, and he was great for me. Obviously, his reputation preceded him. He hadn't long finished playing. He'd had a couple of, I think, of roles before that, but again, he's someone that I looked up to as a youngster and watching him all their Man United days, and he was great. Encouraged me to continue to do what I'd been doing for the reserves and the under-19s that he'd seen a few games in, give me that platform. And obviously, if it wasn't for Steve Bruce, I wouldn't have made my professional debut. Then obviously we got promoted in the May to the Premier League, so it was great, obviously, to have a manager like that giving me my chance, but then obviously gave me a lot of advice along the way.
Yeah, fantastic. That's nice to hear, because obviously lots of things going around about him, being a good or bad manager. But it's nice to see that you recognise that he's definitely got that ability in the game and got that ability managerially. So you joined West Brom obviously in July 2005, as we've mentioned, and you mentioned that Brian Robson was a big part of you moving. Obviously, he's such an iconic figure in English football itself. But how did you find him coming into the club, and who sort of made you feel really welcome in the side when you joined West Brom?
Well, I mean, going back to Brian, he was fantastic. I think he knew it was a big move for me leaving Birmingham. Obviously, that's had been my club from a youngster. I'd supported the club and come through the ranks and everything else. So I think he understood it was a big move. And the first time I'd be moving away permanently from Blues, and made me feel very confident. And also, like you say, he was, I modelled my game on him. So gave me advice as a midfield player. And then going into the dressing room, I was quite fortunate that Jeff Horsfield, who I played with at Birmingham, was there already, and Darren Purse. So obviously I had them two guys that I knew and played with. Then you've got people like Darren Moore. Moore is the nicest guy you'll ever meet on the planet. So I had him, Paul Robinson, John O'Greening, Andy Johnson. So I had some real experienced, good, honest guys in the dressing room that helped me settle in, and again, they understood I was still pretty young. I was only 21 at the time, and helped me to get accustomed to life as a West Brom player. Yeah,
that's quite a dressing room, that is, Darren. Crikey, I was just didn't quite cross my mind the amount of fantastic players and legends in there. Darren Moore included in that as well. So your debut came against Birmingham City. I've got noted down here that you made your first team debut for Birmingham, like you said, against West Brom, and then you made your first competitive debut for West Brom against Birmingham, which is definitely a stat I don't think many other players will be able to have. But obviously, came against Birmingham, lost 3-2 in that particular game. But what was your experience of making your first Albion appearance there?
It was quite surreal, to be honest. Obviously, all I'd known up until that point, I was 21, was Birmingham City, apart from the 6-month loan I'd had at Sunderland. So to be in a opposition dressing room and then come out onto the pitch and obviously have the Birmingham fans behind the goal and, cheering against you, it was the first time. It was quite surreal, really. Yeah. But I was just really sort of focused and driven to prove that, I'd grown up, I could, do it without Birmingham City, if you like. And I always remember, being immensely proud to make my debut. And it was extra special because it was against my former club. But I was gutted, obviously, about the result and us losing the game.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah, I suppose it's a bit. I suppose how do you sort of deal with that? Because obviously you're playing against your supporting club, your hometown club, if you like. How do you sort of like deal with that? How do you deal with that emotion? Because obviously, if I was playing against West Brom, I'd think I'd have a sneaky feeling that if West Brom won, I wouldn't feel all too bad about it. But how do you sort of deal with that playing against the team that you support?
It is difficult. I think when you've had an affiliation with the club like I did, all my family are Birmingham fans, so it was quite weird, really. Their reaction was obviously they were buzzing that Birmingham had won. They had best of both worlds. They seen me make my debut and Birmingham won the game. But ultimately for me, I wanted to make an impression and start with a bang, really, at West Brom. And it was unfortunate that we got beat, but yeah, like I say, it was quite a surreal day, that one.
Yeah, and following on from that debut, you obviously, I think it was kind of a bit of a struggle for you to sort of anchor down your spot in the squad, and particularly in the starting 11. How do you kind of deal with like not being picked or not being in the starting 11 every week? So obviously, you might have had, I'm not sure how you feel, but like over the past, in the start of your career, you might have been picked quite a lot, but then coming into West Brom, how do you sort of deal with being in and out of the side? How do you sort of keep yourself competitive and keep yourself in the manager's thoughts?
I think you have to, a lot of it comes down to the training ground. It's just obviously just getting your head down and working hard. And up until that point, as I mentioned, I wouldn't say I had it easy, but I'd always had the safety net, if you like, of being a Birmingham fan. So playing for Birmingham, yes, I had a couple of bad games, but I never really got any ridicule for it because of being a Birmingham fan. I always got the benefit of the doubt, if you like. So stepping away from that and then coming in and at West Brom, and my form wasn't great to start with. I admitted that, and to be fair to Brian Robson, I always think that he did the right thing. He took me out of the team a little bit to sort of give me a break, and as I say, we're trying to work hard on the training ground. But it was the first time I'd experienced that in my career, any kind of criticism. And it was new to me, so I had to find a way of dealing with that, and that experience ultimately helped me throughout my career then, because you don't know how you're going to react or how to deal with something until it obviously happens. And it was a difficult little period, I think, for me, sort of at the start of my Baggies career, sort of midway, and then I kind of found my feet a little bit and managed to turn my form around slightly. And but yeah, if I could go back and redo that first part, I certainly would do, because my form was wasn't where it should have been. But ultimately, like I say, the experience taught me a lot and helped me then along my career.
Yeah, I bet. And it's good to remember that you were still pretty young then. Like I said, you look at footballers nowadays, and obviously they're making their debuts at 16, 17 or whatever. What were you, 20, 21? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's still a really young player. So yeah, to be thrust into the Premier League in that way is quite a big thing, really. But you came back into the side, and obviously you were given a bit of an appearance against Arsenal, which was quite a big occasion. Obviously, we'll talk a little bit about how you got into that game and how you really made an impact. But how was that coming back into the side? And obviously you came back against Arsenal, who were quite a big team back then, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think in that game, obviously, I started on the bench and came. I think it was 1-1 at the time, and I think it was for just over 20 more, just around about 20 minutes to go. And again, I just felt like remembering the day, we'd done so well in the game. Obviously, Arsenal were littered with stars, Pires and Bergkamp and everyone else all played in the game, Fabregas, and we stuck in there so well, and you just felt like. We were going to get a chance in the game. So when I came on, my focus was just adding to what had been a great team performance. And, fortunately, one's sort of ricocheted to me, edge of the box. And even now, when I look back, the ball is quite awkward, really, the way it sort of flips up. I just instinctively in my head I was always going to hit it. And, it's one of them that you catch sweet as a nut, and you don't do it too often in your career where you catch them sweet from that kind of range and it flies in the top corner. But as soon as I hit it, I knew it was going into the top corner, and fortunately, Jens Lehmann didn't have long enough arms to flick it round the post. So it was a great moment because, like you say, I'd struggled a little bit to start with. But that was an amazing moment, and obviously then we won the game. We hung on and won the game, which made it even better that it was a match-winning goal as well.
Yeah, and it was obviously, like as you mentioned there, the ball fell sort of really awkwardly to you, and it was sort of like when you watch it back, you sort of think you shouldn't, you should try and take a touch and just calm that ball down a little bit because it's bobbling about a bit, but you just hit it. And I've got to ask you about your celebration because you remain so calm, really. Like if I'd have scored that sort of goal, I was saying to a guy we had on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, if you score a belter, if it was me, I'd be in the crowd, I'd have my shirt off and all that jazz. But you just sort of you wagged your finger a bit like that, and you remain so. How did you remain so calm after scoring such a goal?
I'm not sort of a how can I put it? I'm not sort of one of these that will go mad or mental at anything. I've got quite a calm, measured demeanor. I think the only time I tend to lose my anger really is at referees, which I suppose is understandable. But no, in terms of goals I've scored and in games, I've always remained quite calm and calculated. So even when I've scored some of my goals and even some big goals in my career, that I've never been one to go and knee slide and all that sort of and jump into the crowd. But I do look back and think on them moments, and a lot of people say that to me. I'd have done this, I'd have done that, but it was just a natural reaction, and I'm not one to over celebrate. So I sort of understand that, if you like. That explains it for me at least. Just knowing that you weren't. Yeah, you just sort of went, that's an all right goal, But you are quite a calm person, so that's good to understand that. But yeah, obviously that season wasn't too successful for Albion. It was a season where we got relegated. Obviously, the season before was the Great Escape, and last week on the podcast we had Martin Obrechtsen, who was obviously a big part of that Great Escape, and obviously obviously I think there's a picture of you and him celebrating a goal together I saw on Google Images as well, which is quite nice, in that nice blue kit. It was against Leeds, I think.
So obviously you got relegated the season that you joined. How did you kind of feel after that? How does that kind of sink in? Because it's obviously a very difficult feeling that I'm sure a lot of Albion fans have related to over the past few years, but how did you feel after that?
Gutted ultimately, and gutted more so because I didn't feel like we were a bad team. I thought we were fighting against it all season, but I felt like there was games that were very tight against some of the bigger teams as well, where we were in the games and we lost by the odd goal. So I didn't think we were a million miles away from being a team that could stay in the Premier League, and that was probably the thing that wrangled most. That we were. We weren't a bad team, and obviously the first time I've been relegated in my career as well. So it was a horrible feeling. But straight away, straight off the bat, I was hopeful that we could keep a lot of our players that we'd had. I knew it'd be a summer of turnaround and people in and outs. But I wanted us to try and keep the core of what we got. And as soon as we pretty much done that and added a couple, I was really driven and confident then to going into the next year that we could make a run of it and go straight back up. So, my mentality changed quite quickly. I didn't want to dwell on it too much. I just wanted to get into the next season to try and get ourselves back up and promoted, because I was ultimately really confident with the squad that we managed to hold on to.
Yeah, definitely. It's a good mentality to have, really. Obviously, I'm sure a lot of players have been relegated for the first time, especially as you were, as we mentioned, at such a young age. You know, it'd be quite easy to just dwell on it and think, you know, I'm pretty upset about that. But yeah, obviously it was difficult for Albion that season, but the season in the Championship wasn't too bad, and obviously until the final game, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But so you played both Championship football and Premier League football in your career, especially obviously before West Bromwich Albion. Obviously you played for Sunderland and Birmingham. How did you find the difference between the Premier League and the Championship? How was that? Because obviously it's changed a lot since probably then. But how did you find it back then?
I think the pace of the game in the Championship was a lot more up tempo, and I think there was, you know, I always felt like you didn't get as much time on the ball in the Championship. In the Premier League, I think obviously the quality went up, and I think there was more respect. So you allowed teams to have the ball a little bit more and set up maybe a little bit more defensive. But ultimately in the Premier League, you got punished. Any mistake you made, you know, ultimately would concede a goal, or, you know, it would lose you the game. And that was the one big thing, that the quality in the Premier League always shone through. So you had to be concentrated at all times and have to limit your mistakes ultimately. And so that was the big thing that stuck out for me from Championship to Premier League. And you could probably say that is still the case today. And although, you know, I think the tempo of the Premier League now is certainly very high. Yeah,
definitely. I think it's one of those things where you lose the ball on the edge of your box in the Premier League, it's in the back of your net. You lose the ball in the Championship on the edge of the box, you know, it's probably might end up in the stand or something like that. So yeah, it's definitely the difference in quality today, and back then is definitely still pretty similar. But obviously you scored another pretty nice goal as I was looking through the Albion archives earlier today against Leyton Orient in the League Cup, which I think was the same season as what we're talking about now. Again, another one that you just managed to hit sweet as a nut. Well, I suppose how did you do it? It's probably similar to last time, but you know, that ball coming across, what were you thinking when that cross was played over to you?
Well, it was John O'Greening who crossed it, and you know, I know most Albion fans who obviously watch Jono week in, week out would have known that he loved to chop. So he'd fake to cross it, he'd chop back, and he'd sometimes do it 3 or 4 times. And as a teammate, you got used to that quite quickly. So I think Jono had the ball out on the right wing, the right flank, and he went to cross it. I thought, he's not putting it in, so he chopped back on his left. I thought, he's not going to put it in with his left, so he chopped it down. And then when he did actually deliver it, I think maybe 3rd or 4th, it might have been even 4th time, I'll have to watch it back. But I kind of time a run to the back post, and it just, again, one of them that the ball found me perfectly. I managed to time a run perfectly and connect sweet as well. So it's always a nice goal that I like to look back on, because, you know, it just, everything come together, and I caught the ball really sweet, and it hit the underside of the bar and went in. So it's a nice goal to look back on, that one.
Yeah, it sounds like the most challenging part of that goal wasn't the strike itself. It was waiting for Jono to actually cross the ball into you, by the sounds of things. So yeah, definitely the most challenging part of that. Definitely wasn't the screamer goal. It was waiting for Jono to actually cross it to you. But yeah, but obviously moving on to the end of that season, which was a playoff final against Derby, obviously at Wembley, which is, I'm sure, a nice experience. You know, obviously not when you lose, but going into the ground and stuff like that. How did you find that experience in that playoff final against Derby?
I loved it. You know, obviously, barring the result, it was my first time, obviously, being at Wembley and playing at the new Wembley as it was then. And again, I was supremely confident. I think that season, again, I was a little bit gutted, and as were the lads, really, because the quality we had, I really did think we were going to finish in the top 2 and get automatic promotion. And when we didn't, and obviously finished in the playoffs, I was still supremely confident that we'd win and go through. And obviously, I think we beat Wolves in the semi-final over 2 legs, which was nice. And I think that just even enhanced it then. And going into the final against a strong Derby team, I still fancied us. And I think on the day we had a couple of chances, but we just, you know, the frustration is we didn't perform to the levels that, you know, or the quality that we had in the team. And it just wasn't meant to be on that day. And it was a mistake for their goal, and we got punished, and it just seemed like we huffed and puffed, but it just wasn't going to be our day. So that was really gutting. That was probably more gutting than the relegation the year before, because I was so confident that we were going to go straight back up. So that one was definitely a hard one to take. And also I knew then that the players that had stayed from the Premier League were going to potentially move on. Curtis Davis was one of my, he's my best pal to this day. And, I knew Kurt would, more than likely move on. And, there's a few more that left. So it was, Diamanti Kamara was another one. So yeah, it was gutting really, because I knew that, ultimately that the squad would definitely be tore up, if you like.
Yeah. It's one of those that, like, Derby obviously went up that season, and they went and did such a terrible job in the Premier League the following season. And from an Albion perspective, you just look at yourself and you just look at the squad that we had then, and you just thought we could have done a much better job than obviously they did in the Premier League. But yeah, obviously the squad did the band did break up in the end after that season. It caught everybody went kind of in their separate ways, and it was a bit of a rebuild project. Obviously you left West Bromwich Albion for Preston North End in that summer, I think. Just sort of why did you end up leaving? How did that obviously I know the band was breaking up, but sort of what happened then?
Myself leaving West Brom, Tony Mowbray was the manager. Got on really well with Tony, and loved the way that he wanted to play. From a midfield player who likes to play with the ball on the floor, he was great. And in the Preston move for me, really well, signed 3 or 4 days before the first game of the season. I look back now and speak to like Curtis and Nathan Ellington and Diamanti, and at the time I was trying to convince them to stay. And it actually ended up that I was one of the first to go. Again, weird how football works out. But Preston came in for me, and Preston had a great season the year before. And I spoke to Tony Mowbray, and people say, do you have regrets in your career? And that, I tried to say no, because every experience, I've had in football has benefited me in the long run. But if I had my time again, that decision to leave at that time, I'd definitely redo, because I was happy at West Brom. I loved it there. And as I say, I loved it, with Tony Mowbray. But there was just something about the Preston move, and Tony Mowbray had said to me, be a rotational system. I'd probably be in one game and out the next. And, something in my mind was I wanted to start every game. I think it was a little bit of me just, wanting to be a starter every week in, week out.
Yeah.
And Preston were offering me that, and they were going to be, what I thought contenders the year, that year as well. So I made the decision to go up there. And ultimately, West Brom ended up getting promoted. We missed out on the playoff with Preston. So you could say, if I had a redo, it would probably, be that. But again, like I say, I went to Preston and I was up there for 4 years, met some fantastic people, lifelong friends, and had some really good experiences up there. So, it is what it is. Your decisions, as you're saying, you make in your career, in your life. Ultimately, you take your own journey and your own path. But that's one I'd definitely have a redo on, I think.
Yeah, not the end of the world though. Not the end of the world. He's obviously made friends and obviously had a good experience there still. So it's not quite the end. But Darren, I'm just going to ask you a few of the sort of general questions that aren't really specialised to you. I tend to ask them to every West Brom guest, and like they're just the sort of ones that the fun questions, as I call them, the ones that I really want to find out. So obviously, Darren, you played in the Premier League, you played in the Championship, you played in a multitude of different leagues in your career. Who do you think the best player that you played against was? Maybe not the player that obviously on paper is the best, but the player that you played against and they just had an absolute stormer against you.
Well, I always say I was very lucky, really, and fortunate that I came into the Premier League in an era where we had Thierry Henry. I got to play against Henry, Gerrard, Scholes, Roy Keane, Beckham, Giggs, an unbelievable array of players. And I actually played my first season for Birmingham in the Premier League. We played Liverpool away. So I went up against Gerrard and Alonso, and I always remember them two being, incredible. I actually played against them the following year then for West Brom. I think that was a game where Crouch scored and we lost 1-0, but again, two in midfield were unbelievable. But probably best performance I witnessed live and going up against was JJ Okocha at Bolton.
Oh, wow, yeah.
So, yeah, not one that, obviously a great player. Just as you say, on the day, he was just unbelievable, unplayable. His skill level and technical ability was incredible. I think we lost the game 4-2 at Birmingham. I think he scored 2, maybe set up the other 2. He was just a magical display. At the time, it didn't feel too good witnessing it firsthand, but looking back, that was an unbelievable individual performance.
Yeah, that's got to be. I think that must be a big Sam Bolton side as well. That we're thinking of here.
And some good players, Bolton, at that time. So George Kayev and Campo had some good players.
Yeah, they got. I think they must have got European football not too long after that as well. So yeah, JJ Okocha is definitely one that's spurred my memory, and I'm going to have to go and watch a compilation of his in a little bit. But and West Brom, obviously, who do you think was the best player that you played with obviously on the same side as at West Brom?
Again, I feel like I was, very fortunate. My first season, Kanu obviously is the first one that springs to mind. Just his ability and stuff that he'd do on the pitch and in training as well. He was incredible. But I really enjoyed playing with Jason Kumas. I thought, Kumi was a technically really gifted player, a game changer, an X factor, if you like. And then one of the best finishers I played with in my career was Kevin Phillips. So, again, very fortunate really. There's 3. And, probably all playing, as forward players. But Kev Phillips definitely one of the best, if not best finishers I've played with. Yeah,
that's a stunning front 3 that you just named off there. We wouldn't mind having.
Too bad.
Yeah, we wouldn't mind having that back now. And obviously you visited lots of different grounds. You played in lots of different grounds, Premier League, Championship, all the different leagues. Which one do you think was like the best ground that you enjoyed playing
in? I think probably at a push was Anfield. I think, I was fortunate. I played there a few times in my career. And it's just something about Anfield, the atmosphere and walking out, and obviously you'll never walk alone, being sung and all the flags and everything else. So it always felt like a special atmosphere at Anfield. Played at Old Trafford. Old Trafford was always one of my favourites. And actually, I played at Highbury, so Arsenal.
Oh wow!
For the first couple of seasons, again with Birmingham and West Brom. And I always liked Highbury. It wasn't the biggest of grounds. The pitch was always immaculate, but there was just something about it being quite enclosed, and the atmosphere was always really good there. I'd probably say Anfield or potentially Highbury.
Nice. Very good choices there, Darren. But obviously your playing career is not no longer almost. It's not going on at the moment. You've got a bit of a role at West Bromwich Albion at the moment, Darren. If you just wouldn't mind talking a little bit about what you're up to at the moment.
Yeah, so I've been coaching alongside playing for probably now the last 3 or 4 years. So I was at Solihull Moors last year, and was my role ultimately was going to be as first team coach under Jimmy Shan, obviously ex West Brom, and I ended up registering as a player due to COVID and injuries. So I actually played a fair few games last year, and I thought last year would be my transition fully into coaching, but it's pushed on to this year now. So I'm fully fledged in the coaching world now and doing my A license, and alongside that, back at the club with the West Brom ladies now. So alongside new head coach Jenny Sugarman. Been in now about 5 or 6 weeks with them, and really enjoying it. It's just great to be back at the club as well and seeing some old faces, and there's still a lot of people who have been at the club, from way back when I was there. So it's, I always loved being at Albion. It's a real, a great club with some real good people, and it's nice to be back in a role there.
Yeah, it's great to see the women's team in particular having a real rise throughout the club, obviously getting, a lot better, and obviously you're a part of the coaching team and obviously the new head coach, as you mentioned there. How are you sort of finding transferring your playing skills into coaching? How are you sort of trying to get that into that? Do you think they help quite a bit with the coaching?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, this group, of players, they're fantastic. I think one thing you want as a coach is players that listen ultimately and do what you want them to do, or at least try to. But yeah, they're very coachable, and I love it. For me now as an ex-player, I haven't officially hung the boots up, but they are sort of there, ready to be hung up. But yeah, going into the coaching, you want to then transfer all your experiences you've had as a player, but then you've got to learn a new skill really as a coach. It's a lot about communication, how you get your message across, how you then manage players and coach players. So it is a completely different dynamic. And as I say, I'm on my A license now as well. So the coaching badges certainly help that and give you, a lot of learning and help you develop. But I've loved it. I love being out on the grass and coaching and trying to help players get better. Ultimately, it gives me a real buzz. So yeah, from playing and winning games and scoring goals and being part of a great team performance, I find now that my drive and reward is seeing players that you've helped or coach go and be successful and do things in the game. So that's the ultimate drive for me now.
Fantastic. I notice how you said the boots aren't quite hung up yet. I reckon you and Alex Mowat would have a pretty tasty encounter for goal of the season, really, if you pair played together. I think you'd have a right good battle seeing who could score the biggest screamer. But Darren, it's been a massive pleasure having you on the Baggies podcast this week to chat about your time at the Albion. It's really been a pleasure chatting to you, and obviously it's great to see the work that you're doing with the Albion women's team. But thank you very much for joining us. It's been a pleasure speaking to you.
No, thanks for having me, Lewis. Really appreciate it. And I'll be down at the Baggies quite a bit this season as well. So, hopefully they continue on that upward trajectory and get promotion. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, ready to get those boots on, I think you are. But yeah, Darren, it's been a pleasure having you. But a massive thank you for listening to the Baggies podcast with Darren Carter. And be sure to subscribe to the Baggies podcast if you haven't already. But we'll see you with another fantastic episode following the next round of fixtures. But we'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.